I'd like to invite everyone to imagine for a moment that you are handed this document or maybe emailed this document, and your boss told you you have 45 minutes to do research to find important information that will be critical work for your job. Looking at this, do you think it would be interesting? Would you be motivated to read it? Would you be confident in reading it? The good news is, you can take a deep breath. This is not actually happening, but this happens to students all the time. It happens in our places of work that we come across difficult or scary looking texts or tasks, and we have to just do it. So how can we prepare students to be able to do this in their lives? I'm Sora Wondra. I'm a middle school history and high school psychology teacher at Commonwealth Academy. You can follow me at Sora Wondra on Twitter. And in this picture, I'm George Washington for a simulation on the Constitution because I'm always looking for more ways to help students engage with history. And my research is on psychological barriers to difficult texts in history class. But really, this could be generalized to almost any subject where students are asked to research at a reading level that may not be quite where they're at. So you could think of any difficult text in this case. We expect students to read, we expect students to engage with things that are scary. And if we can't even take a look at them or begin to read them, we're not going to get very far toward all these standards and objectives that we're trying to meet as educators. So the problem I was looking at was that interpreting primary sources, which is really just firsthand accounts, is a key skill for history courses. It's in a lot of standards. But there are psychological barriers that can get in the way of engagement for a lot of students, for a lot of people. So for my research, I was working with a mixed class of 6th and 7th graders at our independent school in Alexandria, Virginia. And we specialize in working with students who have learning differences. Our population is very neurodiverse, and in particular, we work to help students with executive functioning weaknesses. We help them with organization, we help them with emotional control, and we help them with creating a more stable educational environment. Many of them have come from negative educational experiences, and often they need to reset a little bit. Our class sizes are particularly small, less than 10. And this is our ideal world. We want students to be confident and motivated to know what their learning styles are, and then be able to self-advocate for the best environment for them to succeed in any learning or work environment. So my question was, what are some of the potential barriers for students, especially with learning differences, to access primary source documents in the history classroom? And I started coming up with a little bit of a flow chart. If we imagine a student is asked to read this, the first question is motivation and engagement. Are they interested in learning this? Okay, sure, so they are. Now there's a new hurdle of confidence. Do they think they can read it or engage with it? Maybe they do, but if at any point along motivation or confidence, the answer is no, they fall into this area of disengagement, and then they kind of have to start over. You have to look for a new hook, a new way to engage them in the content. But if they do get over the motivational hurdle and the confidence hurdle, there's a question of supports and skills. Do they have the tools and or skills they need to access it? And if all of those are yeses and you finally made it to the end, good, the document is read. And then you can start your lesson of trying to help make sure they understand and comprehend and analyze and evaluate. But all of these things are standing in the way. So I was doing a lot of research, and in my literature review, I came across a few different themes. First is that due to educational histories, students with learning disabilities have a higher risk of motivational and confidence challenges. I use learning disabilities here because this is in more of the literature than learning differences. But in particular, this stood out to me from learning disabilities research and practice. I'm going to focus on what's in bold here. But if students lack the motivation to engage in learning, growth will be limited. Motivation activates the behavior to engage in learning. And since so many adolescents with learning disabilities feel marginalized in that learning process, some will choose to disengage. So how can we help them through these barriers? How can we help them build the confidence for the future? Ultimately, this issue of motivation and confidence are really interconnected. We know motivation is so crucial, not just for learning, but for positive outlook in general, for goal setting, but it's so tied into where we're at in our current needs. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the issue of confidence and self-esteem is a little bit higher up. It's not always the first priority. If a student doesn't feel safe, either emotionally, mentally, or even physically in the learning process, they're not going to be worried about confidence and self-esteem. They have to feel safe first. But what I did find is there's a lot of good research that engagement and routine can help students with learning disabilities access difficult content. There's a lot of strong curricular models that are based on routine, and this is also seen throughout our school. So here's a quick look into my classroom pre-COVID, and I'll just point out a couple things. In every classroom in our school, they post the daily agenda in every class in the same place. So students learn to look where to see all of the objectives for the day. Each class also has a color-coded binder with the same, more or less, tabs for each class, so they can quickly see which binder they need to grab for which class. And these hand signals up at the top are consistent through most of the classroom. Students can signal without even saying anything to the teacher if they need to use the restroom, get some water, or take a break and get a lap. And this is sort of the ideal world idea here. Students who are confident learners and self-advocate tend to be more successful in the long term. If we can help them crack that code, start to ask for what helps them best, it's going to help them significantly. So looking at this concept map, I wanted to focus on these two areas, on motivation and confidence for my research. But as I started collecting information from students, I realized it really is a puzzle. I had all these different pieces, qualitative and quantitative, and I needed to put together and create a picture of what these barriers are and how we could maybe help students remediate them. So one thing I did was collect student checklists. Before and after 6 different lessons using primary sources, I asked students to rate their confidence and rate their motivation. How are you feeling before you read it? How do you feel after reading it? And I also asked them for a few short responses on why, some qualitative data. I tried to use a variety of different topics, hoping I could hook different students and different interests at different points. And this is a little peek at the data. Looking across all those different lessons, we can see a variety of interest in the readings they're about to engage with. So the blue is not interested at all. 14% really were not interested, but 15% in green were excited, and 32% were really interested. So we have a pretty good spread of interest going into all of this. I also collected some student artifacts. I had students complete several surveys, giving me a little more information about the process of reading primary sources. I collected some student assignments I could refer back to in the future. And I also did a group interview where I asked the whole class to reflect on this process. These are a few student artifacts, projects that were created after we read 2 primary source accounts of the Trail of Tears. And this is different ways that students interpreted the texts that they worked with. I also kept a teacher log and some field notes. After each lesson, I would just take quick notes, quick reflections, anything that might impact the data, if there were anecdotes or technical issues, or if we ran out of time in a particular period. When I actually launched my student checklists for these 6 key lessons, I tried to make the survey look the same with some thematic changes so students became comfortable with the instrument. They would answer 4 questions before the reading and 5 questions on the right as an exit ticket after the lesson. I started getting some really interesting, especially qualitative feedback. It gave me a little bit of a sense of what might be going on in my students' heads. So on a scale of 1 to 4, do you feel confident about reading this primary source today? 1 is not confident. I saw a lot of negative self-talk, even though this was not a large number of students. Because I am lazy, because I can't read when I'm bored, because I suck at reading, I really need improvement. I could see how this would really get in the way of a student as they begin engaging with this lesson. Some were just honest with me. That's how I feel. But maybe they're just beginning that self-talk, being able to articulate exactly what's going on and why or why not they may be confident. And as we start to get into the threes, some of these were just funny, but I wanted to also keep any spelling errors in here because I thought it was an element of student voice. I want to focus on this one at the bottom. The student says, I think I am confident enough for 3, not really a 4 this time because my attention span today is a little short. But great self-awareness to know that today is not maybe my top day. I might need to accommodate for that in some way. So I had a few initial findings. I'll kind of run through these 4, but I wanted to remind you at this point that this is exploratory and not experimental. So one thing I found was that students really are more confident if they have control over reading levels. 4 of my lessons use Newsela, and if you're not familiar with it, it has a great feature where students in the middle of a reading can go in and change the reading level. So what we see here is a primary source that I used. This is one of the higher reading levels, and you can see how big this paragraph is. Now, if you change the reading level to a lower level, they try to preserve the voice of the author, but look how much shorter that paragraph is. They even changed the headers to make it a little easier to follow. One student reflected, I've read primary sources before, and if it's too hard, I can always change the settings so it's easier. This was really great for students. My one assignment that was only on paper that I gave to students, I tried to keep really short and use a font designed for easy reading, but students overwhelmingly rated this as the lowest understanding and the lowest learning of all of the readings. I think it had to do in large part with not being able to manipulate it. I also learned that first impressions are important. Students did not enjoy looking at fancy old-timey scripts. I think it's cool, but they don't. So you see on the left an actual primary source document from the Library of Congress, and then on the right, how they have transcribed the same document to be in plain text. Students overwhelmingly reported that if there are short paragraphs, if it looks easy to read, if they don't see a lot of difficult looking words, they're going to be more confident. This is a text I thought early on in the year students would really find interesting. It's from George Washington's diary. I thought they would love the fact that the S's are F's and that it would be a fun way to decrypt. No, overwhelmingly it was a negative response to this letter. One student reflected, the things that tell her something's going to be hard to read are if it's a small font, sees old paper or old words. It makes her nervous when you just keep scrolling down and it's so long. So there are some cues that students use to indicate whether or not they think something will be difficult. But overarchingly, student confidence tended to go up after reading, which was positive. At the top, you see confidence before reading, and the bottom is confidence after reading. This is just broken down by lesson, but it's the same information, and the really confident, that yellow, you see also gets bigger as the year goes on. There's more and more students feeling confident both before and after, but I wanted to just show you here, by the end of virtual learning, I did have a reduced response rate. I didn't have every student participating. Overwhelmingly, students said that they felt like they understood the reading and learned from the source. This is just self-report, but it's helpful to see when students say no, when they identify that maybe optimal learning has not taken place. This is just, again, by lesson, and it's interesting, over time, fewer and fewer students said no in answer to the questions about understanding and learning. But one thing I couldn't quite figure out was interest. When I started to drill down into the data and I thought, surely this student will find this particular lesson interesting, it didn't work out that way. So this is an area I think still needs more research. And there were some challenges, obviously. I mentioned the response rate already. Some of the students who did not respond in virtual mode may have been some of the ones who would have said, I didn't understand or I didn't learn from it. Students also just had bad days, and they would be honest about that. It wasn't a good day for the lesson we were trying to do. I also found it really difficult in virtual learning to support students in the way they might need because I had fewer visual cues to see what was going on. But just a quick few calls to action for educators. I encourage you to collect more data. I found it so helpful at the end of a lesson just to have a quick touch point of how many students thought they got something from it, how confident they felt. That was very beneficial to me as a teacher in the moment. For primary sources or other texts, especially in ELA that are at different reading levels, I highly recommend Newsela and Common Lit and Stanford History's Reading Like a Historian. If you find yourself virtually teaching, I highly recommend Pear Deck for slide discussion activities similar with Nearpod. And Parlay is a great anonymous discussion feature for older students. And then for leaders and policymakers, I really recommend more use of dyslexia-friendly style guides. Lexen Deca is a Google Suite font that is designed to help people with dyslexia and others who have difficulty reading read more easily. I think it's so great to invest in technology which empowers both teachers and students. I think it's so cool that Newsela encourages students to become a part of that process, and also to just look for whole child ways to support motivation. When students feel confident that they can be learners and be part of that process, they can engage quite a bit more. And this is what we're really trying to get to. Remember, number 4 was really confident. This is what we want students to reach, because I can decipher the complex language that is old-timey language. I already know a lot about this topic, and I want to learn more. I've gotten used to reading primary sources. I feel very focused today, and I'm in a good mood, because I like history. I felt good last time, so I feel pretty confident this time. I'm going to build that confidence over time so students can approach more and more difficult tasks as they head toward adulthood. And the last thought I want to leave you with is that you should invite students to investigate mysteries in whatever form you have. One really great insight I got from students was that in history, so many times there's no plot twists. But if you don't know what's going to happen, it draws you in more. Students want to be involved in the process, but in a safe way where they can feel confident. So please feel free, let me fix that. Feel free to contact me with any thoughts, and thanks for listening.